Blessings be unto you. You can hear. I still have some issues with congestion, but my thanks to all those who have been praying. Weather changes and things of this nature has caused the lightness of voice and that type of thing, but we push on to do the tasks that has been laid before us. We will start here in about a moment. This is an encouraging word. I am your host, Gabriel Matthews, and on first and third Sundays, we come before you live to give just a brief word of encouragement and in where we need to, edification, and to equip you to engage your day, your week, and in this case, a new month. As you know, again, first and third Sunday. Welcome to November 2019. It's amazing. We have come this far. And indeed, as the song says, we've come this far by faith. That said, it is 7 Central Standard Time, 7 a.m. Hopefully you got that nice extra hour of rest. And that will give you another boost of refreshing for a beautiful day set ahead. Let's go into the Word of God, Job chapter 14. Starting at verse 1, man born of a woman is short of days and full of trouble. Excuse me. He blossoms like a flower, then withers like fleas. He flees, like a shadow and does not last. Do you really take notice of one of these? Do you really take notice of one like this? Will you bring me into judgment against you? Who can produce something pure from what is impure? No one. Since man's days are determined and the number of his months depends on you, and since you have set limits he cannot pass, look away from him and let him rest so that he can enjoy his day like a hired hand. Dropping down 13, if only you would hide me in Sheol, or in the grave, some translations say, and conceal me until your anger passes, that you would appoint a time for me and then remember me. When a man dies, will he come back to life? If so, I would wait all the days of my struggle until my relief comes. I would wait all the days of my struggle until my relief comes. And I want to encourage you to know today, we shall live again. I shall, you shall live again. Many of us are familiar with the account of Job, and I may have to talk a little louder just to overcome the grogginess of voice. So if it's a little loud, just kind of turn me down a little bit. Many of us know the account of Job. Just a few things that we want to keep in mind and carry forward. We won't try to exhaust 14 chapters in these few minutes we have left, but let's just consider a couple of things that may be noteworthy. One, Job is not an Israelite, and I think that's always important to mention. Job is not an Israelite, but lived to the east of Palestine in the land of Uz near Edom. Again, he's not an Israelite, and we'll see in a moment why that's important. Of course, as most of us know, he was rich in both family and possessions, having 10 grown children, 7 sons, 3 daughters, and many cattle, many camels, and on and on and on. Quite wealthy, as a matter of fact, because he had so many, thousands upon thousands of camel, goats, sheep, etc. He had a large household, which means he had a lot of not only children, but a lot of servants, which we know would become significant in the chapters to come. He was highly considered by God. Also note, highly considered by God, counted as blameless, upright, and resisted evil or shunned evil. Now, again, this is why it's important to realize he is not a Israelite, or in the New Testament, he would be classified as a Jew. He was not a Jew. He was not a Hebrew. He was not of that nation. He did not live in Palestine. He was not a displaced Jew. that got scattered to the east of Palestine. Plain and simple, he is not a Jew. Not being an Israelite, however, meant he served the God of the Hebrews by virtue of what he had heard. That's why this is so important. So he served God strictly on the basis of what he had heard about him and his exploits, what he had heard about him and his exploits. Note in chapters 40, I believe around verses 3 through 5, and in chapter 42, 1 through 6, I believe, he admits as much, that he had only heard about God, but when God appears to him, chapters 38 through 42, he then says, now I know you, if you will, face to face. But he says in those chapters, again, chapter 40 and 42, look, I didn't know you. I had only heard about you. So even Job says, I've been living this life for God. Essentially, he admits through these chapters that I had been living my life for God on the basis of strictly of what I heard. It almost reminds me of when I was a child and we had to go to church, and we had to go to church on a regular basis. And I didn't fully, obviously, understand. I didn't become a Christian until 17. So the first 16 years of my life, I was really living on the testimony of my parents, and of course, by their instructions and by their rules. I wasn't one guilty of a lot of things because I was not living on the basis of ultimately my own relationship with God. Now, that's not so much the case with Job, in that we know he did have a relationship with God. Again, we don't want to try to cover 14 chapters, but he was making sacrifices of all those animals and from those animals to God on behalf of his children, imploring his children to stop the partying and stop that lifestyle, lest some unfortunate event would come upon them, which unfortunately, indeed, and in fact, what happened. See chapters 1, 2, and 3. That said, by the time we come to our, we want to get this in, so then we get to chapter 3, all the calamities that would befall Job have now befallen him, including his body has been stricken with boils. I've only seen one person with a boil, and just one boil, and the absolute agony that person was in with one boil. I can't imagine a body covered with him, but Job was, not only was his children killed by Satan, and his servants, save one, killed by Satan, we know that his body was covered. He was inflicted with boils from head to toe. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, head to toe. We have no reason to believe that his private areas were missed, his back, so there's no way you can sit, no way you can lay, and not already be in pain because of the boils. I want to make sure you get this. He's in absolute agony from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. And we have every reason to believe that every part of his being was covered with boils, and that there was no particular part of his body left absent of boils. Even if you want to imagine that his eyes or something like that didn't have a boil coming, out of it. But still, imagine from head to toe covered with boils. And so by chapter 3, Job begins to speak. Now, he speaks after 7 days to his friends, 7 days and nights of them just simply sitting speechless. Job begins to speak and ultimately say, man, I just cursed the day I ever came to be. I wish, well, I don't want to get into some of Job's language there, even though it's in the Bible, but basically, Job essentially says he wished his mother would not have pushed him out. I think that's about as nice as I can say it. Job said it a little bit more colorful than that, but essentially Job cursed the day of his birth and wished, considering the pain, not just on the outside of with his body, but in his heart, having had all of his children die, all of his wealth with camels and things are gone, and his servants are gone. And so now Job sits in absolute poverty from great wealth, the wealthiest of all in the East. He goes from that to absolute poverty. He goes to a father with 10 grown children, I suspect quite healthy, doing well, feeling well enough to be partying from house to house, to absolutely, boom, gone. to a wife, I'm sure, who had birthed these children and feeling good about life, to now she's grieved and saying, why don't you curse God and die? His friends who thought well of him are all now sitting here in absolute astonishment and probably absolute fear, considering Job was devout, blameless, and now he's been inflicted in this manner. So that you can only imagine the kind of fear and horror on their faces, 7 days and 7 nights, to see their dear friend. And if you read, I know that's, because we see what happens and what they do. Matter of fact, from chapter 3 on, how they come at Job. But if you go to chapter 2, you will see the fact that Job's friends, when they saw him at a distance, were so devastated by what they saw of Job that they began to cry aloud and throw dust up in the air upon their heads, which is a great sign of grieving. Another thing you see in the scriptures as a point of reference is the tearing of clothes, which Job's clothes indeed were torn, and he's laying in ashes and in sackcloth. So these types of things, throwing dust in the air, I think this actually still, in some countries, they still do this. So they were grieved to the utmost and trying to figure it out, as many of you have dear friends. We have dear friends who care and believe they know us well. And so when calamities come, they try to subscribe, and not just friends, family members. So it's not strange, and I want to defend his friends to some extent. It's not strange that the people who know you when a bad situation happens will often try to figure out. Now, sometimes you want them to keep it to themselves. I understand that, but they will try to figure out what's going on and why life has dealt you a blow, because they love you, they care about you. It's not just because they're nosy. And no, some genuinely, try to figure it out and try to offer their solution. It may not be much of a solution for you and to you and in your thinking and in your ears, but it doesn't mean that they care any less about you. They're just clueless. They just don't really know what they're talking about. And so this is Job's life. By the time we come to our selected passage, think about it, we have 11 chapters of Job trying to figure it out himself and also having to defend himself against the false accusations of his friends. So recognize this is what's going on from chapter 3 to chapter 14. He's having to defend himself, yet he's also musing. He's also trying to. It's poetic. It falls in the books of poetry, because he's musing to himself, and his friends are there listening now. Understand, for many, many, many days, they are there with him as he is talking in a real sense to himself, trying to figure out how he has fallen into. I want to paint this picture. I don't want to go through every chapter, but make sure you understand that in real truth, if you see how it is written, Job is actually in a very poetic way trying to figure out his plight. How did he come to be in this situation? His friends are there listening to his musing, to his discourse, to his poetic, traumatic circumstance, and they are trying to answer him. They are trying to offer their explanation. Now, that's what's going on from chapter 3 up until our present chapter. And in our text, Job, again, is musing the difficulty of this life and whether or not death. Now, I know this might not sit well with you, but just stay with me. This is what's going on. By the time you get to chapter 14, and I know some of you are believers and you might not want to be honest with yourself. I'm not telling you to get on here and say anything, but be honest. You have had times, even during your Christian walk, of thinking that this life might not be worth the living. You ain't got to do. Nobody's there with you. You're by yourself. And this is what happens with Job. Remember, he is blameless. That's why I wanted to go back to chapter 1. He's blameless in the sight of God. He has done no wrong. Not only does God see him that way, Satan sees him that way. His friends see him that way. He is a man of humility. Yes, he's a man of wealth, but he is a man of great humility. And God sees him as blameless. And when it comes to the law, he has shunned all manner of evil. He's not one of us who would get money, as they say, and go out there and live it up. No, he is the absolute opposite of the prodigal son. He has not asked for his wealth so he can spend his substance. He is a man of wisdom He is a man who loves God, even though it is a God he does not know about. As you see how it's coming together. So when you get to 14, Job is saying, look, I just can't figure this out. So if death is a viable option, because man born of a woman is of a few days and full of trouble, and he goes on to say 1 through 6, God, and you know this, you know how many days we have to live, how many months we have to live, how many years we have to live. I mean, are you going to judge me? Are you going to bring me before you? Are you going to make me come before you in judgment? I mean, my life is full of trouble. So there are believers who are watching live and will watch this back. If you're honest, you have had days when you have looked around and mused within yourself and said, you know what, I would never want to kill myself, but life is so difficult. You've lost loved ones. You had a great job. You had a nice home. Then somebody got sick. You got sick. You had to spend all of your substance. You became destitute. You went down. If you just want to be honest with yourself, at least for a moment, you not Job. Don't get it twisted. You ain't lost 10 children and lost every single thing and the magnitude of him. But you've had your days when the person you didn't think would leave you left you, when the marriage ended, when your child flipped out or was actually or killed, on and on and on and on and on. Those who are going through the fires, losing everything. I'm sitting right now in the wonderful state of Louisiana, and more than once, particularly South Louisiana, people have lost everything. Even in Houston, Texas, or in that area, people have had, hurricanes or tornadoes and things of this nature in Oklahoma, and had by natural storms everything gone. And I can't even imagine the kind of devastation. But I can imagine that there have been those, even believers, who have felt like, and I know we don't want to hear it, but so destitute, just trying to find answers, and can literally find no answers, and saying, you know what, God, death might be a viable option here. Death might be the best way to go. That doesn't fit in our thinking, but I'm a truthist. I'm a person who believes you just get real about a thing and tell the truth. If you read the words of Paul, we don't have time, but if you read the words of Paul in Corinthians, if you read descriptions of Paul's circumstances and issues and problems he was facing because he was preaching the gospel, and it said in many commentaries, and I've read, Paul had reached the point of depression. Paul? No, Paul was spirit-filled. Paul was powerful. How about Elijah, who felt like he was the only prophet left, and the king Ahab and his wife Jezebel were pursuing his life and killing the prophets and by the hundreds and taking them out. And God took care of him to the cave and then said, Elijah, what's going on with you? God, I'm the only one left. They're killing the prophets. And God had to encourage him by telling him, no, there's 7,000 who haven't bowed to Baal. Understand, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, men and women of God, yes, you love God. Yes, God is in you. You have the Spirit of God in you. Yes, he hasn't given us the spirit of fear, but of love, power, and sound mind. And yes, while all that's true, you are still a human being, and you still feel. You still have deep emotions. You get angry. You have times of jealousy, confusion, depression. Don't let anybody play you like your humanity ceases to be. Don't let anybody tell you and convince you that somehow you cease to be human. In fact, you are quite human. And because you have the contrasting of God's presence on the inside, it makes you keenly aware of the truth. I believe that a believer is more aware of their humanity than a non-believer. A believer has to deal with and fight with and struggle with and fight the battle every day. We talking about Satan. How about fighting ourselves? How about fighting off our own anger, fighting off our jealousy, fighting off temptations? I see Job, and I see a man who is just like me. And I like Job. For Jesus Christ said that Elijah was a man. Yes, he did say it shall not rain according to my words. But he also said of Elijah, he was a man with the same kind of weaknesses. Paul talked about the fact that while I'm doing ministry, I have to consider myself, lest even I be a castaway, lest even I find myself in a bad situation. As a matter of fact, I love Romans chapter 7. Let me work a little bit, 14 through 25, when he said, when I go to do good, evil is ever present. So what I would not do, I find myself doing, and what I would want to do and desire to do, I find it a struggle to do. Well, clearly Job is in a situation where he's so inflicted and so down and so no doubt depressed. Yes, he was blameless, loved God, absolutely pursued after God. Job says, as a matter of fact, and I got to wind it down, I believe in Job 23 or 24, he says in there, I consider the words of God more than my necessary food. You have to understand, Job was a man who loved God, and that's why we pick up our verses, though he slays me, yet will I trust him. God, look, if death is an option, if there's any way to ease my frustrations, my pain, my depression, if death is viable, then God, let me get that. Now, understand, the reality of it is this life has its difficulty. I wish I could come and tell you something different, but I can't. This life comes, as Job said, full of trouble. It comes full of agony. It comes full of issues. I wish even I could say to you as believers, you give enough tithe and offerings, if you just show up to enough Bible studies, if you just make enough Sunday morning services, if you just watch enough of these broadcasts, if you just be nice to enough people, then you will be able to escape the calamities of this life. No, brothers and sisters, you live long enough, you're going to see issues. If you live long enough, you're going to see struggle. If you live long enough, there are going to be problems. If you live long enough, you're going to see something that you cherish slip from your hands. But I tell you this, and I came to encourage you, you shall live again. For Job said, if a man die, shall he live again? And I'm here to tell you, indeed, and in fact, we shall live again. And when God shows up on the scene and questions Job, he said, come on up here, Job. Let's have a little conversation. We need to get some things straight. And that's when Job admits, you know what? I didn't really know you. I had only heard about you. Hopefully, I'm talking to some people who have gotten to know God so that you can answer, even in the frustrations and stress of life, that you can answer even when it seems like depression is pushing in. You can encourage yourself in the Lord. I don't have time to read it, but if I could go over to 1 Corinthians 15, you would see there that Paul says, and I'm done, you would see there with Paul that he talks about Jesus who has been buried and who has died through crucifixion, buried, but yet has risen from the dead. And he said, if Jesus had not risen, then we would not have this hope of being risen from the dead. We are buried with him, and yet we rise with him. And so to answer Job's question, Paul says, yes, indeed, Job, a man who dies shall live again. For my word tells me that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believe in him would not perish, but will have everlasting life. Which means that even though this body, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, indeed it shall go to Sheol, it shall go to the grave, it shall return to the ground. We know that we have eternal life if we believe in Jesus, and that we will be resurrected with a new tent, as he says in 15, or 1 Corinthians 15, we will get a new body. I want to encourage you, brothers and sisters. I don't care what kind of difficulty you're facing. Gabe, you just don't know. You're right. I don't know. And you don't know what I've been through, but I ain't got to know what you've been through, and you ain't got to know what I've been through. What we both better know is that though this life is difficult, though this life has struggles, or as Job called them, troubles, many, and some people's lives are difficult from the open to the close, and brief indeed and in fact. Some are stillborn. Some only live a few years. Some live their whole life in and out of the hospital. I know it's difficult, but I'm here to tell you, Hold on to your faith in Jesus. Hold on, because you shall live again. Yes, Satan may be wreaking havoc in your body, in your finances, with your children, with your spouse, on your job. You just can't get a leg up in the, no matter how much you hustle, no matter how much you give, no matter how many times you speak the word over yourself, no matter how many times you decree and declare, you name it and claim it, you grab it and blab it, you reach up and pull it down, you sing every praise song known to man, you dance all around, you anoint every wall in your house with oil and pour oil on your head every day and write scriptures on your walls, and you do everything you can think to do, and you give everything you can think to give, and difficulty still comes. But I'm here to tell you, no matter the difficulty, to live is Christ, to die is gain. We will be raised with him. We will be caught up to meet him in the air. We will be with him for all eternity. So hang on in there, my brothers. Hang on in there, my sisters, because the day is coming. The hour is coming. Once to die, then the judgment. And you want to stand on the right hand of the white throne judgment. And here, come into your rest. Come take my rest. Come and be at peace. You want to enter in. You want to enter into the pearly gates. You want to walk the streets of gold. You want that new body. You want a new and refreshed mind. Hang in there. You shall, I shall, we shall live again. Be blessed.